Welcome to Poirot Stories, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot brings captivating mysteries to life.
In the shadowed halls of Ravenwood Hall, a scream pierces the night. Lady Margaret Ashbourne lies dead in the rose garden, her throat cut, a single fresh petal beside her. Who wielded the blade? Was it her betrayed husband, Sir Reginald, hiding a vengeful secret? The lover she kept in the shadows? Or the young couple, Clara and Roger, desperate to protect their forbidden love? As lies unravel and alibis crumble, only one man can see through the web of deceit. Hercule Poirot, the master of the little gray cells. Will the truth bloom like the roses, or remain buried in thorns? Chapter 1. The Quiet Before the Storm. In the waning days of autumn, when the leaves of Kent turned amber and gold, the grand estate of Thornfield Hall stood as a monument to elegance and restraint. Its ivy-clad walls, softened by centuries, loomed over manicured lawns that stretched toward a mist-shrouded lake. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke, and the sky hung heavy with the promise of rain. It was, as Captain Arthur Hastings would later reflect, the sort of setting that seemed to whisper of secrets that, in time, would demand the attention of Hercule Poirot's little gray cells. Thornfield Hall belonged to Sir Reginald Ashford, a retired diplomat whose charm and wealth had long made him a figure of quiet renown. On this particular weekend in October 1927, the estate was alive with the polite hum of a carefully curated gathering. Sir Reginald had invited a select group to celebrate the engagement of his niece, Miss Clara Ashford, to Mr. Lawrence Vane, a barrister of rising reputation. The guest list was small but eclectic, a constellation of personalities whose orbits, Hastings would note, seemed destined to collide. The drawing room, where the party had gathered after dinner, was a study in opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over mahogany paneling, and a fire crackled in the hearth.
Black dress severe against the room's warmth, her eyes scanning the group as if cataloguing their flaws. Beside her was Dr. Hugh Marlowe, a physician and old friend of the Ashford family, whose quiet demeanor and attentive gaze suggested a man who saw more than he said. Miss Beatrice Lyle, Clara's childhood friend, fluttered about the room, her laughter a touch too loud, her gaiety a touch too forced. And then there was Mr. Victor Crane, a stockbroker with a penchant for expensive cigars and a reputation for financial daring, whose presence seemed to unsettle Sir Reginald more than he cared to admit. Captain Hastings, invited as a friend of Lawrence Vane's from their university days, found himself an outsider in this tight-knit circle. He sat in a high-backed chair, nursing a brandy and observing the undercurrents of the gathering. There was, he thought, a peculiar tension in the air, a sense that the polite smiles and murmured pleasantries masked something darker. He could not put his finger on it, but the feeling lingered, like the faint creak of a floorboard in an otherwise silent house. As the clock struck 9, Sir Reginald clapped his hands, calling for attention. "My dear friends," he began, his voice warm but firm, "tonight is a celebration of love and family. Clara and Lawrence have brought us together, and I propose a toast to their future happiness." Glasses were raised, murmurs of agreement followed, but Hastings noticed Clara's hand tremble as she lifted her champagne flute. Lawrence, standing beside her, placed a proprietary hand on her shoulder, and she stiffened almost imperceptibly. The toast concluded, and the conversation resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. Mrs. Hartley made a barbed remark about hasty engagements, which drew a sharp look from Lawrence. Dr. Marlowe excused himself to check on a patient in the village, promising to return before midnight. Miss Lyle, perhaps sensing the growing unease, suggested a game of bridge, but his back. Blood pooled on the blotter beneath him, staining the papers he had been reading. Lawrence Vane
let out a strangled cry and rushed to the body. But Hastings, with a soldier's instinct, held him back. "Don't touch him," he said sharply. "We must preserve the scene." His mind raced, already cataloguing the details. The open window, the scattered books, the faint smell of cigar smoke lingering in the air. He glanced at the clock on the mantel, 9:15 p.m., and made a mental note of the time. The other guests crowded into the doorway, their faces a gallery of shock and suspicion. Mrs. Hartley clutched her shawl, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the scene. Miss Lyle stifled a sob, clinging to Clara, who stood rigid, her face drained of colour. Victor Crane, who had re-entered from the terrace, stood apart, his cigar forgotten in his hand. "We must call the police," Lawrence said, his voice hoarse. "And a doctor. Perhaps Dr. Marlowe is still nearby." "Yes," Hastings agreed, "but we must also secure the house. No one leaves until we understand what has happened." As the group dispersed to their tasks, some to telephone the authorities, others to search for Dr. Marlowe, Hastings felt a familiar stirring of resolve. This was no ordinary crime, he thought. The precision of the wound, the timing of the cry, the open window, they all pointed to a mind that planned and calculated. And for a crime such as this, there was only one man whose clarity of thought could unravel the truth. "Poirot," Hastings murmured to himself, already composing the telegram he would send to his old friend in London. "We need Hercule Poirot." Chapter 2. The Shadow of the Crime. The library of Thornfield Hall, now a grim tableau of death, seemed to hold its breath as the reality of Sir Reginald Ashford's murder settled over the house. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and blood. Miss Beatrice Lyle, her earlier vivacity extinguished, sat on a bench in the hall, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. Victor Crane, the stockbroker, had retreated to a corner, his cigar extinguished, his face unreadable. Dr. Hugh Marlowe, who had returned from the village just as the police were summoned, stood near the body, his medical bag open but untouched, his expression one of quiet dismay. Hastings, though no stranger to death, felt a chill settle in his bones. The brutality of the act, the deliberate plunge of the letter opener, suggested a personal animus. Yet the open window and scattered books hinted at an outsider's intrusion. The contradiction gnawed at him, and he longed for the clarity of his friend Hercule Poirot, whose methodical mind could untangle such knots. The local police arrived shortly after 9:30 p.m., led by Inspector Caldwell, a stout man with a bristling mustache and a no-nonsense demeanour. He surveyed the scene with a practiced eye, barking orders to his constable to cordon off the library and take photographs. "A nasty business," he muttered, kneeling beside Sir Reginald's body. "Stabbed clean through, I'd wager. No sign of a struggle on him, though. Odd, that." He glanced at Hastings, noting his calm observation. "You're Captain Hastings, yes?" "Friend of the family. Of Mr. Vane's, primarily," Hastings replied, his tone measured. "I was in the drawing room when we heard the cry. We found Sir Reginald just as you see him now." Caldwell nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "Time of death, Dr. Marlowe?" he asked, turning to the physician. Marlowe, who had been examining the body with careful detachment, straightened. "Between 9 and 9:15 p.m., I'd estimate, based on the body's warmth and the state of the blood. The wound is precise, likely a single blow, delivered with force." Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "And you were where, Doctor?" Guests were herded into the drawing room, where they sat in uneasy silence. Clara, her composure fraying, whispered to Lawrence, "Who could do this? Uncle was so kind, so loved." Her voice broke, and Lawrence murmured reassurances.
though his own face was taut with strain. Mrs. Hartley, sipping a fresh glass of sherry, spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. "Kind, perhaps, but not without enemies. Reginald was a diplomat, my dear. Men like him collect grudges as others collect stamps." Her eyes flicked to Victor Crane, who stiffened but said nothing. "Mrs. Hartley, please," Beatrice Lyle protested, her voice trembling. "This is no time for such talk." "Isn't it?" Mrs. Hartley replied, arching an eyebrow. "Someone in this house, or just outside it, drove a blade into Reginald's back. I'd say it's precisely the time for such talk." Inspector Caldwell re-entered, his notebook now filled with scrawled observations. "Right," he said, addressing the group. "I'll need statements from each of you. Where you were, what you heard, what you saw. No one leaves this house until we've got to the bottom of this. And I'll need to know about Sir Reginald's affairs, debts, rivalries, anything that might give a motive." The guests exchanged glances, some guarded, others openly anxious. Hastings, watching closely, noted the way Victor Crane's fingers tightened around his cigar case, the way Clara's eyes darted to the floor, the way Lawrence's hand lingered protectively on her shoulder. There were secrets here, he thought, layered beneath the surface like the pages of a book. As the inspector began his interviews, Hastings slipped away to the hall, where a telephone sat on a polished side table. He dialed a familiar number in London, his heart lifting at the thought of his friend's arrival. The line crackled, and a voice answered, precise and accented, with a hint. The morning after Sir Reginald Ashford's murder dawned grey and heavy, with a mist that clung to the grounds of Thornfield Hall like a shroud. The estate, so elegant the previous evening, now seemed to sag under the weight of tragedy. The police had come and gone in the night, leaving a constable stationed at the front gate and the library sealed with tape. The guests, confined to the house by Inspector Caldwell's orders, moved through the halls with the restless unease of caged animals, their polite facades fraying under the strain of suspicion. Captain Arthur Hastings stood by the drawing-room window, watching the gravel drive for the first sign of Hercule Poirot's arrival. His telegram had been urgent, and he knew his friend would not delay. The events of the previous night replayed in his mind, the cry from the library, the sight of Sir Reginald slumped over his desk, the letter opener glinting cruelly in his back. Hastings had spent the sleepless hours cataloguing details, the open French windows, the scratches on the latch, the faint whiff of cigar smoke that lingered in the air. He hoped these fragments would spark Poirot's genius, for the case already felt like a tangle of contradictions. At precisely 10:15 a.m., a sleek black taxi crunched up the drive, and out stepped Hercule Poirot. He was a diminutive figure, immaculate in his tailored coat and polished shoes, his moustache waxed to perfection despite the early hour. His green eyes, sharp as cut glass, surveyed the estate with a quiet intensity, as if the very stones might whisper their secrets to him. Hastings hurried to the door to greet him, relief washing over him at the sight of his friend's familiar silhouette. "Poirot, thank heaven you're here," Hastings said, shaking his hand warmly. "It's a grim business. Sir Reginald Ashford stabbed in his own library, and no one knows who did it or why." Poirot raised a gloved hand, stepped inside, his movements precise and deliberate. The room was as Hastings had last seen it. Sir Reginald's body had been removed, but the blood-stained blotter remained on the desk, the letter opener now bagged as evidence. The scattered books, the overturned chair, and the open French windows painted a scene of sudden violence. Yet Poirot's expression remained impassive as he took it all in. "Regardez, Hastings," Poirot said, pointing to the desk. "The papers here.
They are not scattered at random. See how they are arranged, as if someone wished to draw attention to them. He bent closer, his gloved fingers hovering over a crumpled sheet of notepaper bearing Sir Reginald's monogram. And this, ink smudged, but not by accident. Someone has handled this recently, perhaps in haste. Hastings frowned, peering over Poirot's shoulder. You think the killer was looking for something? A document, perhaps? Perhaps, Poirot murmured, his voice soft but laced with certainty. Or perhaps they wished us to think so. The mind of the criminal, Hastings, is a mirror. It reflects what they wish us to see. We must look beyond the reflection. He moved to the French windows, examining the scratches on the latch with a magnifying glass he produced from his pocket. These marks, he said, they are curious. Too regular, too precise. An intruder would be less careful, no? And the ground outside, see how the gravel is undisturbed? No footprints, no signs of flight. This window, it is a stage prop, meant to distract. Hastings felt a thrill of excitement. Poirot's observations, so simple yet so incisive, were already reshaping the case in his mind. So you think the killer was someone inside the house? Poirot smiled faintly, adjusting his hat. I think nothing yet, mon ami. I observe, I listen, and I let the little grey cells do their work. Now, let us meet these guests of yours. There were.
You will, I trust, assist me by answering my questions with honesty. The smallest detail, a word, a glance, a moment, may hold the key to justice. Clara Ashford, seated beside Lawrence, looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. We'll do anything to find who did this, Mr. Poirot. My uncle was a good man. Bon, Poirot said, his gaze lingering on her. Then let us begin. Miss Ashford, tell me, what was Sir Reginald doing in the library last night, before the tragedy? Clara hesitated, glancing at Lawrence. He said he had some correspondence to attend to. He often worked late. I didn't think anything of it. Poirot's eyes flicked to Lawrence, who nodded curtly. That's right. Sir Reginald was always busy with his papers, letters, investments, that sort of thing. He didn't mention anything unusual. Mrs. Hartley, seated with her sherry, let out a soft scoff. Unusual? Reginald was always up to something, Mr. Poirot. Diplomatic secrets, financial schemes. He never shared, but he never stopped plotting. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Merci, Madame Hartley. Your candor is most illuminating. And you, Mr. Crane, he said, turning to the stockbroker, who had been silent. You were on the terrace, were you not, when the cry was heard? Crane shifted uncomfortably, his cigar case clutched tightly. Yes, I stepped out for a smoke. I heard the cry and came back inside, but I didn't see anything. Rien du tout? Poirot pressed, his tone gentle but probing. No movement, no shadow in the garden? Nothing, Crane said firmly, though his eyes darted to the side. Poirot nodded, as if satisfied, but Hastings knew better. His friend was planting seeds, watching for reactions, building a map of lies and truths. As the interviews continued, Hastings felt the familiar stir of anticipation. Deliberate, as if measuring the very rhythm of the truth. Mes amis, Poirot began, his voice soft yet commanding. We find ourselves in the shadow of a tragedy most grave. Lady Margaret Ashburn, a woman of grace and vitality, is no more. Her life was extinguished not by chance, not by accident, but by the hand of one among us. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. A sharp intake of breath came from Miss Clara Winthrop, the young governess, whose pale hands twisted nervously in her lap. Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on each suspect in turn.
There was Sir Reginald Ashbourne, Lady Margaret's husband, his face a mask of stoic grief, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Beside him sat Dr. Harold Vance, the family physician, whose fingers drummed an erratic rhythm on the arm of his chair. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, Lady Margaret's cousin, clutched a lace handkerchief, her lips pursed in disapproval. Mr. Edward Grayson, the estate's solicitor, adjusted his spectacles with a trembling hand, while young Roger Ashbourne, Sir Reginald's nephew, slouched in his chair, his sullen demeanor at odds with the occasion. Finally, there was Clara, her wide eyes darting toward the door as if longing to flee. "Let us proceed with order and method," Poirot continued. "Each of you will recount your movements last evening, from the hour of 8 o'clock, when Lady Margaret was last seen alive, until midnight, when her body was discovered in the rose garden. I ask for precision. The truth, it hides in the details." Sir Reginald was the first to speak, his voice steady but clipped. "I was in my study until 9:30, reviewing estate accounts. Margaret came to bid me good night before retiring. I heard nothing unusual after that. At 10, I joined."
"Such an hour. Most interesting. Did you perhaps see Lady Margaret?" "No," Vance replied quickly. Too quickly. "I saw no one." The garden was quiet. Clara Winthrop's voice trembled as she spoke next, unprompted. "I was with the children until 8:30, reading them a story. Then I went to my room. I didn't leave until I heard Mrs. Langley scream." Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. "And yet, mademoiselle, your window overlooks the rose garden. Did you see or hear nothing unusual?" Clara's cheeks flushed. "It was dark. I was reading. I didn't look out." Mrs. Langley's sharp voice cut in. "I was in the drawing room, knitting, until 10. Then I retired. I saw Margaret at dinner, but not after. I heard nothing until I went to check the garden at midnight, purely by chance, and found her." Her voice cracked, but her eyes were dry. Poirot turned to Roger Ashbourne, who had remained silent, his arms crossed defiantly. "And you, Monsieur Roger?" "You, the nephew who stands to inherit, should Sir Reginald have no heirs?" Roger's jaw tightened. "I was in the billiard room, playing alone, from 8 until 11. Then I went to bed. Didn't see Aunt Margaret after dinner." Poirot paced once more, his steps slow and deliberate. "Bon, we have the alibis. But alibis, mes amis, are like the threads of a tapestry, beautiful until one pulls, and the pattern unravels." He stopped, his eyes gleaming. "Now, let us consider the scene. Lady Margaret was found in the rose garden, her throat cut with a sharp blade, precise, deliberate. No struggle, no cries heard, save for Mrs. Langley's discovery. The ground was dry, yet a single rose petal, crushed, lay beside her. Curious, no? And the time, between 8:30 and midnight, according to the good Dr. Vance's examination." He turned to Vance. "You are certain?" "It?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Mon cher Hastings, you begin to see. The petal is a clue, yes, but it is the why and the who that matter. Patience. The truth, it ripens slowly." The chapter closed with Poirot standing alone in the drawing room, his gaze fixed on the garden beyond, where the roses swayed in the morning breeze, silent witnesses to the crime. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The afternoon light filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of Ravenwood Hall, casting long shadows across the polished floor of the library. The room, lined with leather-bound volumes and smelling faintly of old paper and wax, was now a stage for suspicion. Hercule Poirot sat in a high-backed chair, his small hands folded neatly in his lap. his eyes sharp and unyielding as he observed the assembled company. Captain Hastings stood by the window, his notebook open, his pen poised to capture every word, though his mind raced with the growing complexity of the case. The atmosphere was taut, as if the very air held its breath. The discovery of Lady Margaret's body in the rose garden had shaken the household, and now, with Poirot's probing questions from the morning still echoing in their minds, the suspects were on edge. Each face bore the strain of concealed truths, and Poirot, with his unerring instinct, was determined to unravel the tangle of lies. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice calm yet piercing. "We have established the movements of each of you on the night of Lady Margaret's murder. But movements, they are not enough. The heart of this crime lies in the motives, the secrets, the little contradictions that betray the guilty. And so we turn now to what is most obvious and often most deceptive." All eyes turned to Roger Ashburn, the sullen nephew, who slouched in a corner chair, his arms crossed tightly. The room seemed to close in around him, and Hastings
"Yes, we argued. She was always meddling in my affairs, but I didn't kill her. That knife's been in my room for years. I use it for carving wood, not that." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the outburst. "Calm yourself, Monsieur Roger. The truth, it does not shout, it whispers." He turned to the inspector. "This knife, it has been tested for blood?" Reynolds hesitated. "Not yet, Monsieur Poirot. The laboratory will take a day or two. But the circumstances, Poirot interrupted, his tone gentle but firm, "are like the red herrings, Inspector. They distract, they mislead. A knife in a drawer is not a confession. We must look deeper." Poirot's gaze shifted to the others, his eyes lingering on Dr. Harold Vance, whose fingers had resumed their nervous drumming. "Dr. Vance, you have said you walked in the garden at 9 o'clock. Yet, the gardener, Monsieur Higgins, tells me he saw a figure near the rose garden at that hour, a figure he could not identify, cloaked in shadow. Could this have been you?" Vance's face paled, but he answered steadily. "I told you I walked alone. I didn't go near the rose garden. Higgins must be mistaken." "Perhaps," Poirot mused, his tone deceptively mild. "And yet, mistakes. They are rare in the observations of a man who tends roses with such care. We shall see." He turned to Mrs. Beatrice Langley, whose lace handkerchief was now a crumpled ball in her hands. "Madame Langley, you discovered the body at midnight. You say you went to the garden by chance. But tell me, why does a lady, at such an hour, venture alone into the cold night?" Mrs. Langley's lips tightened. "I couldn't sleep. I often walk the grounds when I'm restless. Margaret and I were close. She was my cousin, after all. I felt drawn to the garden, as if something called."
"I told you, Poirot, I was absorbed in my work. The windows were closed. I heard nothing." Poirot smiled faintly, a smile that sent a shiver through Hastings. "The windows. They are always closed in this house, it seems. And yet, the truth, it finds a way to slip through." He stepped back, addressing the group. "Mes amis, we have a knife, a shadowy figure, a restless cousin, and alibis that are perhaps too perfect. But the little gray cells, they are not deceived by what is obvious. The knife, it may point to Monsieur Roger, but it is too convenient, no? The truth lies elsewhere, in the silences, the glances, the things left unsaid." As the group dispersed, Hastings leaned toward Poirot, his voice low. "You don't think Roger did it, do you? The knife seems damning, but you're not convinced." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Mon cher Hastings, the knife is a distraction, a red herring placed to lead us astray. The true clue is in the rose petal, fresh, not wilted, as it would be if it had lain there for hours. Someone was in the garden later than they admit. We must watch, we must listen, and we must think. The library door closed behind them, leaving the suspects to their uneasy thoughts, while Poirot's mind churned, piecing together the puzzle of Ravenwood Hall. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The late afternoon sun dipped below the horizon, bathing Ravenwood Hall in a soft amber glow that did little to dispel the chill of suspicion that had settled over the estate. The rose garden, once a place of beauty and serenity, now seemed to whisper secrets with every rustle of its petals. Hercule Poirot stood alone on the gravel path leading to the garden, his small, neat figure dwarfed by the towering hedges. His hands were clasped behind his back, his head tilted slightly as he studied the scene where Lady Margaret Ashbourne had met her end. Captain Hastings hovered nearby.
These roses, they are fresh, their petals firm. The petal we found beside Lady Margaret was the same, fresh, not wilted, not dried. If it had fallen hours before, as the time of death suggests, it would show signs of decay. Yet it did not. This tells us something, does it not? Hastings frowned, his mind struggling to keep pace. You're saying someone was here later, after the murder, and dropped the petal? Poirot rose, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. Précisément. The petal is a witness, Hastings. It tells us that someone returned to the scene, perhaps to ensure the deed was done, perhaps to cover their tracks. We must find who and why. They returned to the house, where Poirot had arranged to speak privately with each suspect in the small parlour, a room adorned with faded tapestries and a ticking grandfather clock that seemed to count the seconds of their unease. First to enter was Miss Clara Winthrop, the governess, her pale face framed by a simple bonnet, her hands clasped tightly to still their trembling. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began, his tone gentle but probing, "you have said you were in your room reading after 8:30. Yet your window, it overlooks the rose garden. Tell me, did you truly see nothing? A shadow, a movement, perhaps the glint of a blade?" Clara's eyes widened, and she shook her head vigorously. "No, Monsieur Poirot, I swear it. I was reading a novel. The curtains were drawn. I heard nothing, saw nothing." Her voice quavered, and Poirot noted the way her fingers twisted the hem of her dress. "Bon," he said, nodding. "And this novel, what was its title?" Clara hesitated, her cheeks flushing. I don't recall exactly. It was one of the children's books. A fairy tale, I think." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "A fairy tale at such a late hour? Most curious. You may go, mademoiselle." Next came Dr. Harold Vance, his face drawn and his fingers once again dry.
Cells, they notice everything. "You may go." One by one, the others followed. Sir Reginald, whose stoic demeanor faltered when pressed about his study's proximity to the garden. Mrs. Langley, whose story of a midnight walk grew vaguer with each question. And Edward Grayson, whose nervous fidgeting with his spectacles betrayed more than his words revealed. Roger Ashbourne, still bristling from the accusation of the knife, repeated his alibi with sullen insistence, but Poirot's questions about his movements after 11 o'clock left him visibly rattled. As the interviews concluded, Poirot stood by the parlor window, gazing out at the darkening garden. Hastings approached, his notebook now filled with scribbled observations. "Poirot, you're on to something with that petal, aren't you? But everyone's sticking to their stories. Who do you think it was?" Poirot turned, his mustache twitching slightly. "Mon cher, the petal is but one piece of the puzzle. There is another clue, one I have not yet shared. In the soil near Lady Margaret's body, there was a faint impression, a heel mark, small, as if from a lady's shoe. Yet none of the ladies admit to being in the garden after 8:30. Someone lies, Hastings, and the lie is beginning to crack." Hastings's eyes widened. "A lady's shoe? But Clara and Mrs. Langley both claim they weren't there. Could it be someone else?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Patience, mon ami. The little gray cells, they work. Tomorrow, we shall examine the shoes of every lady in this house, and we shall see what other secrets the rose garden holds. As the grandfather clock struck 6, its chimes echoing through the silent parlor, Poirot's mind churned with the precision of a machine, piecing together the fragments of truth hidden in the shadows of Ravenwood Hall. Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The evening at Ravenwood Hall was cloaked in a heavy silence, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl and the soft creak of the house settling into the night.
Precision. The lies. They multiply like shadows in a storm. But shadows, they are cast by something real, no? Tonight, we have seen the cracks in the facades of our suspects, and now we shall uncover more. Hastings leaned forward, eager. You mean the interviews today? Clara's hesitation about the book, Vance's evasiveness about the garden. There's something off, isn't there? Poirot's mustache twitched in a faint smile. Précisément. But it is not only what is said, but what is not said. The silences, the glances, the secrets held close. Tonight, we have learned of motives that run deeper than a simple quarrel over money. The day had been one of revelations, though subtle ones, uncovered during Poirot's relentless probing. After the morning's interviews, he had requested access to the personal effects of the suspects, a task Inspector Reynolds had grudgingly facilitated. In Clara Winthrop's room, Poirot had found a letter, half burned in the grate, its contents partially legible. You must tell her, Clara, or I shall. The signature was missing, but the handwriting was unmistakably masculine. Clara, when confronted, had paled and stammered, claiming it was a note from a friend, unrelated to the murder. But her eyes, wide with fear, told a different story. In Dr. Vance's medical bag, Poirot had discovered a vial of sedative, its label worn but indicating a potent dose, enough perhaps to render someone insensible before a blade was used. Vance had dismissed it as routine, a necessity for his practice, but his fingers had trembled as he explained. And in Mrs. Langley's room, a locked diary had been found, its key missing. When pressed, she claimed it contained only personal reflections, but her refusal to open it raised Poirot's suspicions. The most startling discovery, however, had come from Sir Reginald's study. Tucked beneath a ledger was a draft of a new will.
Consider the heel mark in the garden. A lady's shoe, small and delicate. Clara and Mrs. Langley deny being there, yet the mark exists. And the rose petal, fresh as if plucked that very night. Someone was in the garden after the murder, perhaps to ensure Lady Margaret was dead, perhaps to plant the knife in Roger's room to shift suspicion. He rose, pacing slowly before the fire. Let us imagine, Hastings. Lady Margaret. She is killed, her throat cut with precision, no struggle. This suggests she was taken by surprise, or perhaps sedated, no? Dr. Vance's sedative could explain this. But the petal, the heel mark, they point to a second presence, someone who came later. And then there is the matter of time. The body was warm at midnight, yet the petal was fresh. The murder, it was closer to midnight than to 8:30. Hastings's eyes widened. You're narrowing the window. But that means Mrs. Langley, who found the body, or someone who was in the garden late. Exactement, Poirot said, his voice soft but intense. And so we must look closer at Madame Langley. Her story of a midnight walk, it is vague, emotional. She claims shock, yet she stood by the body before screaming. Why? To observe? To conceal? Or to mourn? Before Hastings could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. The parlor door opened, and Clara Winthrop stood there, her face ashen, her hands trembling. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, I must speak with you. Alone, Poirot gestured for Hastings to step outside, his expression unreadable.
As Hastings lingered by the door, he heard Clara's voice, low and urgent. "It's about the letter. I lied. It was from Roger. He was in love with me. Lady Margaret found out, and she threatened to send me away. I didn't want to say because—" Her voice broke, and Poirot's calm reply was too soft for its faded tapestries and ticking grandfather clock, a backdrop to the unraveling drama. Captain Hastings stood by the window, his notebook worn from constant use, his eyes fixed on Poirot, who sat with the serene composure of a man who knew the truth was within reach. Poirot's hands rested lightly on the arms of his chair, his green eyes sharp as they surveyed the assembled suspects. The air was thick with tension, each person aware that the Belgian detective's relentless probing had begun to peel back the layers of their carefully constructed alibis. The revelations of the previous day, Clara's admission of her secret romance with Roger, the half-burned letter, Dr. Vance's sedative, Mrs. Langley's locked diary, and Sir Reginald's draft will had shifted the dynamic. No longer were they merely suspects. They were players in a game where Poirot held the winning hand. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice soft but commanding, "we stand at a crossroads in this affair. The murder of Lady Margaret Ashbourne is no longer a mystery of mere facts, but of the heart. Each of you carries a burden, a secret, a fear, a desire. Today, one of you will break, and in that breaking, the truth will begin to emerge." His words hung in the air, and Hastings noted the reactions. Sir Reginald's jaw tightened, his knuckles white. Dr. Vance's fingers stilled their nervous drumming. Mrs. Langley clutched her handkerchief, her eyes darting to the door. Edward Grayson adjusted his spectacles with a trembling hand. Roger Ashbourne glared defiantly, though his bravado seemed brittle. And Clara Winthrop, pale and fragile, seemed on the verge of collapse. Poirot turned to Clara, his tone gentle but insistent. "Mademoiselle Winthrop, last night you spoke of a letter from Monsieur Roger, of Lady Margaret's threat to dismiss you. But there is more, is there not? You loved him, oui. But what else did—" Face had paled at Clara's revelation. "Monsieur Roger, you knew of this, did you not? The child, the threat to your inheritance. Did you confront your aunt that night?" Roger's defiance crumbled, his voice hoarse. "I didn't kill her, Poirot." "Yes, I knew Clara was pregnant. I wanted to marry her, to leave this wretched place. Aunt Margaret was furious. She said I'd ruined the family name. We argued at dinner, but I swear I was in the billiard room after 8. I didn't go to the garden." Poirot's gaze shifted to Mrs. Langley, whose composure had begun to fray. "Madame Langley, you were close to Lady Margaret, yet you have kept your diary locked. Why? What secrets do you hide?" Mrs. Langley's lips pursed, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. "It's private, Monsieur Poirot. Personal thoughts, nothing more. I loved Margaret. She was my cousin, my confidant. I have nothing to hide." "And yet," Poirot said, his voice sharp, "you were in the garden at midnight." "You saw the body, the fresh rose petal. You stood there, you say, in shock. But was it shock, madame, or guilt?" Mrs. Langley's handkerchief fell to the floor, her hands trembling. "How dare you? I found her, that's all. I couldn't believe it. I stood there, yes, because I couldn't move. She was my cousin." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "And yet, madame, the heel mark in the soil, a lady's shoe, small and delicate.
It matches the shoes you wore that night, does it not? The room froze. Mrs. Langley's face drained of color, and for a moment it seemed she might faint. Then with a choked sob she spoke. I did go to the garden earlier, not at midnight. At 10, perhaps. I want to
Study. These are threads, but the knot that ties them is still loose. Tomorrow we shall tighten it. As the suspects left the parlor, their faces etched with fear and guilt, the grandfather clock chimed, its solemn notes echoing through the house. Outside, the roses stood silent, their secrets buried in the shadows of Ravenwood Hall. Chapter 9. The Trap. The air in Ravenwood Hall was thick with anticipation as the evening shadows lengthened, casting intricate patterns across the grand drawing room. The room, with its high ceilings and ornate chandelier, had been transformed into a stage for Hercule Poirot's latest maneuver. The suspects, summoned by the Belgian detective, sat in a semicircle of velvet-upholstered chairs, their faces a gallery of unease. Captain Hastings stood near the fireplace, his notebook tucked away, his attention fixed on Poirot, who stood at the center, his small frame radiating an almost palpable authority. The grandfather clock ticked relentlessly, its rhythm a reminder that time was running out for the guilty. Poirot's green eyes swept the room, lingering on each suspect. Sir Reginald Ashbourne, his stoic facade now cracked by fatigue. Dr. Harold Vance, his fingers no longer drumming, but clasped tightly. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her handkerchief a crumpled relic of her composure. Edward Grayson, his spectacles slipping down his nose. Roger Ashbourne, his defiance tempered by fear. And Clara Winthrop, her eyes red from tears. Inspector Reynolds stood by the door, his expression skeptical but attentive, ready to act on Poirot's conclusions. Mes amis, Poirot began, his voice calm yet edged with steel. We have reached a moment of truth in this affair. The murder of Lady Margaret Ashbourne has revealed a tapestry of lies, secrets of love, betrayal, and greed. Tonight, I, Hercule Poirot, will apply the pressure that will make the guilty one falter. The little gray cells, they have worked tirelessly, and now they are ready to lay a trap. A murmur of unease rippled through the group. Clara's hands twisted in her lap, while Roger's jaw tightened. Poirot paced slowly, his steps deliberate, his hands clasped behind his back. Let us review the facts, with order and method. Lady Margaret was found in the rose garden, her throat.
Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and turned to Clara. Mademoiselle Winthrop, you too were in the garden, seeking Lady Margaret to plead for your future with Monsieur Roger. You saw her body, you say, from a distance and fled, yet the heel mark could also be yours. Did you perhaps see more than you admit? Clara's voice was a whisper.
I swear I only saw her lying there. I was too frightened to go closer. I ran back to my room.
Poirot's eyes narrowed, and he turned to Dr. Vance. Doctor, your sedative, a potent dose, capable of rendering a person insensible. Lady Margaret showed no signs of struggle. Was she sedated before her throat was cut? And your walk in the garden at 9, did you see more than you claim? Vance's face hardened.
I've told you, I walked the east path, not the rose garden.
The sedative is for my patients, not for murder. I examined the body. There was no sign of sedation.
Curieux, Poirot murmured, his tone deceptively mild. He turned to Sir Reginald.
And you, monsieur? Your study overlooks the garden path. You drafted a new will, cutting out your wife. Did you know of her plans to disinherit Roger? Did you act to protect your nephew?
Sir Reginald's voice was low, strained. The will was a draft, nothing more. Margaret and I had disagreements, but I loved her. I was in my study, then the library with Grayson. I heard nothing, saw nothing.
Poirot stepped back, addressing the group. Mes amis, one of you lies, and the lie is crumbling. The rose petal, the heel mark, the knife in Monsieur Roger's room, these are pieces of a puzzle, but they are not the whole. I propose a test, a trap to catch the guilty. Tonight we shall recreate the scene in the rose garden. Each of you will walk the path you claim to have taken, and we shall see.
Retraced her alleged path. Clara followed, her face pale, avoiding the spot where the body had lain. Dr. Vance, Sir Reginald, Roger, and Grayson each took their turn, their alibis reenacted under Poirot's unyielding gaze. As the reenactment concluded, Poirot's voice cut through the night. Mes amis, the garden has spoken. One of you has betrayed yourself. Tomorrow, I shall reveal all. The suspects dispersed, their footsteps echoing on the gravel, while Poirot stood silent, his mind a whirl of deduction, the truth now tantalizingly close. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The grand drawing room of Ravenwood Hall was bathed in the soft glow of the chandelier, its crystals casting fractured light across the faces of the assembled suspects. The air was heavy with expectation, the tension so palpable it seemed to press against the walls. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, his small, immaculate figure commanding the room with an air of quiet certainty. Captain Hastings sat near the fireplace, his notebook open but untouched, his eyes fixed on Poirot, who was about to unravel the mystery of Lady Margaret Ashburn's murder. The grandfather clock struck 11, its chimes resonating like a final call to truth. Mes amis, Poirot began, his voice clear and deliberate. We have journeyed through a labyrinth of lies, motives, and secrets. The murder of Lady Margaret Ashburn was no act of chance, but a calculated deed, executed with precision and concealed with cunning. Tonight, I, Hercule Poirot, will reveal the truth, using the little gray cells to illuminate the darkness of this crime. The suspects sat in a tense semicircle. Sir Reginald, his face etched with strain. Dr. Harold Vance, his hands clasped tightly. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her handkerchief a crumpled relic. Edward Grayson, his spectacles fogged with nervous sweat. Roger Ashburn, his motive, and your presence in the garden raised suspicion, but your fear, your tears, they were genuine. You saw the body, but you did not kill. Clara's sob broke the silence, but Poirot continued, his eyes now on Mrs. Langley. Madame Langley, you admitted to arguing with Lady Margaret at 10 over money. You returned at midnight, you say, and found her dead. The heel mark matched your shoes. But your story, it falters. Why stand by the body in silence? Why the fresh petal, as if plucked that night? Mrs. Langley's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Poirot turned to Dr. Vance. Doctor, your sedative suggested a means to subdue Lady Margaret, and your walk in the garden placed you near the scene. Yet your alibi, it holds almost too well. Finally, he faced Sir Reginald. And you, monsieur, the grieving husband. Your study overlooks the garden, yet you heard nothing. The draft will, cutting out your wife, suggested motive. But it was not enough, was it? Poirot stopped pacing, his eyes gleaming. The truth, mes amis, lies in the contradictions. The rose petal, fresh at midnight, tells us the murder was late. The heel mark, it points to a lady. But the sedative, the lack of struggle, these suggest a plan, a collaboration. And so I turn to the one whose silence has been loudest, Monsieur Edward Grayson. Grayson's spectacles slipped, his face ashen. Me, "This is preposterous, Poirot. I was in the library with Sir Reginald." "No," Poirot said sharply. "You were not. The little grey cells. They have pieced it together. You, Monsieur Grayson, were Lady Margaret's lover. A secret she kept even from her cousin. The half-burned letter in Clara's room was not from Roger, but from you, warning Clara to tell Lady Margaret this morning, dropped in your haste. And the sedative vial, it bears your fingerprints, not Dr. Vance's. Inspector, you may verify." Reynolds stepped forward, his face grim. Grayson's defiance collapsed, and he sank into his chair, his head in his hands. Sir Reginald remained silent, his eyes hollow. Poirot addressed the room. The motive was greed and betrayal. Grayson wanted Lady Margaret's wealth. Sir Reginald wanted revenge. Together, they committed the perfect crime, almost. But the little grey cells, they see what others miss. As Reynolds led Grayson away, the room fell silent. Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice soft. "Mon cher, the truth, it is always there, waiting for those who seek it." Chapter 11. The Reflection. The morning after the dramatic reveal in Ravenwood Hall's drawing room was subdued, as if the estate itself exhaled a sigh of relief, now that the truth had been laid bare. The rose garden, once a silent witness to Lady Margaret Ashbourne's murder, shimmered under a weak sun, its blooms no longer ominous, but merely beautiful. Inside, the grand drawing room was quiet, the suspects having dispersed to grapple with the aftermath of Poirot's revelations. Hercule Poirot sat in a high-backed chair by the fireplace, his small hands folded neatly, his green eyes contemplative. Captain Hastings stood by the window, his notebook closed, his mind still reeling from the precision of Poirot's deductions. The fire crackled softly, its warmth a contrast to the chill that had pervaded the house for days. Poirot sipped a tisane, his movements deliberate, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. The case was solved. The guilty, Edward Grayson and Sir Reginald Ashbourne, were in custody, their motives of greed and betrayal exposed. Yet, as was his custom, Poirot lingered, reflecting not only on the crime, but on the human frailties that had birthed it. "Mon cher,"
Across from Poirot, his expression earnest.
But what about Clara and Roger? They're innocent, but their lives are in tatters. Clara's pregnant. Roger's inheritance is uncertain. What happens to them now? Poirot nodded, his eyes softening. The innocent, they suffer most in such affairs. Mademoiselle Clara, she carries a child and a broken heart, but she is young, resilient. Monsieur Roger, he will face the scandal, but perhaps he will find purpose in protecting Clara and their future. The truth, it has freed them, even if it brings pain. He set his cup down with precision, his gaze distant. This case, Hastings, it reminds us that the human heart is a complex thing. Love, it can inspire great deeds, but also great destruction. Lady Margaret, she was not without fault. Her threats to Clara, her affair with Grayson, her withdrawal of support from Mrs. Langley. Yet, does this justify her death? None. The act of murder, it is a failure of reason, a surrender to the basest instincts. Hastings leaned forward, his voice low. And Mrs. Langley? She lied about her movements, but she didn't kill. Why was she so evasive? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Madame Langley, she is a woman of pride and fear. Her diary, which I persuaded her to open this morning, revealed her secret. She was in debt, dependent on Lady Margaret's charity. Their argument in the garden was not just about money, but about shame. She returned at midnight, not by chance, but to retrieve a letter she had dropped,
a plea for more funds, which she feared would expose her desperation. The heel mark was hers, but her guilt was of pride, not murder. Hastings shook his head, marveling. "You saw it all, Poirot. Every detail, every lie. How do you do it? How do you see what the rest of the front door, where a car waited to take them from the estate? The roses swayed in the breeze, their beauty restored, no longer tainted by the shadow of murder. As the car pulled away, Hastings glanced back at Ravenwood Hall, its grandeur now tinged with melancholy. "Poirot," he said, "do you ever tire of it? The lies, the betrayals, the darkness." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Mon cher, the darkness is why we seek the light. The little grey cells, they thrive on the challenge. And I, Hercule Poirot, will never tire of the pursuit of truth." The car rolled down the drive, leaving Ravenwood Hall behind, its secrets laid bare, its wounds left to time, and the silent roses. Chapter 12. The Aftermath. The pale light of a late September afternoon filtered through the tall windows of Ravenwood Hall, casting long shadows across the polished floors. The estate, once vibrant with the tension of secrets, now felt hollow, as if the revelation of Lady Margaret Ashburn's murder had drained its spirit. The rose garden, though still blooming, seemed quieter, its colors muted under the overcast sky. Inside the small parlor, Hercule Poirot sat in his usual high-backed chair, his hands folded neatly, his green eyes reflecting a calm that belied the storm of emotions that had swept through the house. Captain Hastings stood by the door, his notebook tucked under his arm, his face a mixture of relief and unease as he contemplated the aftermath of the case. The fire in the hearth burned low, its embers glowing softly. Poirot sipped his tisane, the delicate cup a stark contrast to the weight of the moment. The arrests of Edward Grayson and Sir Reginald Ashburn had sent ripples through the household, leaving the remaining occupants to grapple with the wreckage of their lives. Clara Winthrop and Roger Ashburn, now free of suspicion, but bound by their own scandal, had retreated to their rooms. Mrs. Beatrice for she is free of her secret's weight. The little grey cells, they do not only solve crimes, they clear the path for healing, however slow it may be. Hastings sat across from Poirot, his expression troubled. But what happens now? Sir Reginald was the master of this house, and Grayson was his solicitor. With them gone, who takes charge? And Clara, she's so young, Poirot, and carrying a child. Will she and Roger make it? Poirot set his cup down with precision, his gaze thoughtful. The future, it is uncertain, but not without hope. Roger, he is young and headstrong, but his love for Clara, it is genuine. The estate, it will pass to him, for the draft will was never finalized. He will face challenges, but challenges forge character. As for Mademoiselle Clara, she has strength beneath her fragility. They will find their way, perhaps away from Ravenwood, to a new life. He leaned back, his eyes distant. And Mrs. Langley, she will recover. Her diary, it revealed not only her debts, but her love for her cousin. Her silence was born of shame, but also of loyalty. She will mourn, but she will endure. Hastings shook his head, marveling. You see so much, Poirot. Not just the clues, but the people, their hearts, their futures. I thought Grayson and Sir Reginald were cold, calculated killers, but you made me see their desperation, their flaws. Poirot's smile was gentle. The human heart, Hastings, it is the greatest mystery. Grayson, he was consumed by greed, yes, but also by a love he could not have. Sir Reginald, his pride was his downfall, but it was wounded by betrayal. Their crime was monstrous, but their motives, they were human. To understand this, it is to understand why I, Hercule Poirot,
pursue the truth, not for glory, but to restore order to a world disordered by passion. A soft knock interrupted them. The door opened his head.
Inspector, it is my duty to serve the truth. Now you must ensure justice follows.
With that, Poirot and Hastings stepped out into the cool afternoon air, the gravel crunching under their feet. The car waited to take them away, and as they drove down the winding path, Ravenwood Hall receded into the distance, its towers and roses fading into memory. Hastings glanced at Poirot, who sat with his eyes closed, a faint smile on his lips. "Another case solved," Hastings said softly. "You never cease to amaze me, Poirot." Poirot opened one eye, his smile widening. "Mon cher Hastings, the world is full of mysteries, and I, Hercule Poirot, am here to solve them. Now, let us find a good cup of tisane and leave Ravenwood to its roses." The car rolled on, carrying them away from the shadows of the past, toward new horizons, where truth awaited. Chapter 13. The Shadows of Truth. The twilight draped Ravenwood Hall in a soft veil of purple, the last rays of sunlight glinting off the rose garden's blooms, now free of their grim associations. The estate, though still grand, bore the weight of its recent tragedy. Its halls quieter, its occupants subdued. Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings had not yet departed, their car delayed by a minor mechanical issue, giving Poirot one final opportunity to wander the grounds. He stood now on the gravel path leading to the rose garden, his small, neat figure silhouetted against the fading light, his hands clasped behind his back. Hastings followed at a respectful distance, his notebook tucked away, sensing that Poirot's mind was still turning over the case, even with the culprits in custody. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of roses and damp earth. Poirot's green eyes scanned the garden, lingering on the spot where Lady Margaret Ashburn's body had been found, the crushed petal, the heel mark, the spectacles.
Reginald, consumed by pride and betrayal. Clara, caught in a web of love and fear. Mrs. Langley, hiding her shame behind loyalty. Each, in their way, was shaped by their desires, their weaknesses. Hastings nodded, glancing at the garden. "It's a grim picture, isn't it? I keep thinking about Clara and Roger. They're free now, but their future's uncertain. And Mrs. Langley, she's lost her cousin and her pride. It feels like the truth came at a high price." "Oui," Poirot agreed, his gaze distant. "The truth, it is a double-edged sword. It frees, but it cuts. Yet, without it, Ravenwood Hall would remain a prison of lies. Clara and Roger, they have a chance to build anew, though it will not be easy. Mrs. Langley, she must face her debts, but also her strength. The truth, it has given them a path, however difficult." They walked slowly along the path, the gravel crunching underfoot. Poirot paused by a rose bush, its petals vibrant despite the gathering dusk. "This garden," he said, "it is like the human heart. Beautiful, yes, but capable of hiding thorns. The petal we found, it was a clue, but also a symbol, a reminder that even in beauty, there is fragility." Hastings looked at Poirot, his voice soft. "You see so much more than the rest of us, Poirot. I thought the case was about the murder, but you see it as a story of people, their mistakes, their hopes." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Exactement, Hastings. A crime, it is never just a crime. It is a story of motives, of passions, of choices. Grayson and Sir Reginald chose destruction, but Clara and Roger, they may yet choose redemption. And we, mon ami, we choose to seek the truth, to bring order to chaos." As they reached the edge of the garden, a figure approached,
Dr. Harold.
Pay my debts. Margaret would have wanted me to stand on my own. Thank you for showing me that. Poirot bowed slightly. Madame, you have found courage in the truth. That is no small thing. As they climbed into the car, Hastings glanced back at Ravenwood Hall, its towers silhouetted against the twilight. It's a strange feeling leaving this place. So much pain, but maybe some hope, too. Oui, Poirot said, settling into his seat. The shadows of truth are long, but they lead to light. Now, mon cher, let us leave Ravenwood to its future and find a tisane worthy of Hercule Poirot. The car pulled away, the roses fading into the dusk, their secrets no longer a burden, but a memory of a truth hard won. Chapter 14. The Final Threads. The morning mist clung to the grounds of Ravenwood Hall, shrouding the rose garden in a delicate haze that softened its edges, as if the estate sought to veil its recent wounds. The grand house stood silent, its towers looming like sentinels over a landscape forever altered by the truth. Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings had delayed their departure once more, not due to mechanical issues, but at the request of Roger Ashbourne, who had sent a note pleading for one final meeting. They now stood in the small parlour, its faded tapestries and ticking grandfather clock a familiar backdrop to Poirot's quiet contemplation. Hastings, ever loyal, stood by the window, his expression a mix of curiosity and fatigue, his notebook tucked away but his mind alert. Poirot, immaculate as always, adjusted his cuffs with precision, his green eyes thoughtful. The fire in the hearth burned low, casting a warm glow across the room. The case of Lady Margaret Ashbourne's murder was solved. Edward Grayson and Sir Reginald Ashbourne were in custody, and yet Poirot's presence lingered, as if the final threads of the mystery demanded one last tug to be fully woven into place. "Mon cher Hastings," Poirot said, his voice shared ordeal. "Monsieur Poirot," Roger began, his voice firm despite a slight tremor. "Clara and I owe you everything. You saved us from suspicion, from ruin. But we need your advice. Ravenwood Hall, it's mine now, but it's a burden. The scandal, the debts, Clara's condition, what do we do? How do we move forward?" Poirot regarded them with a gentle gaze, his hands clasped before him. "Monsieur Roger, Mademoiselle Clara, you stand at a crossroads. The truth has freed you, but freedom, it comes with responsibility. Ravenwood Hall, it is a symbol of the past, but also of possibility. You ask what to do. I say look to your hearts. You love each other, no? This is your strength," Clara spoke, her voice soft but clear. "We want to marry, Monsieur Poirot, and raise our child away from this place. But the estate, it's Roger's inheritance, and there are debts, tenants, responsibilities. Can we just leave?" Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The estate, it is a heavy mantle, but it need not chain you. Consider perhaps a steward to manage Ravenwood while you build your life elsewhere. The wealth, it can be used to secure your future and that of your child. The scandal, it will fade, for time is kind to those who live with honor." Roger's shoulders straightened, a spark of resolve in his eyes. "You're right. We could sell part of the land, settle the debts and start fresh. Clara deserves that, a home free of these shadows." Poirot's smile widened. "Exactement. You have the courage to choose a new path, Monsieur Roger. And you, Mademoiselle Clara, you have the heart to guide him. Together you will find your way." As Roger and Clara left, their steps lighter, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice low. "You've given them hope, Poirot. But what about the others? Mrs. Lang?" The car. The estate receded into the mist, its roses a silent testament to the truth uncovered. The engine hummed,
carrying them away from Ravenwood's shadows, toward new challenges where Poirot's genius would once again shine. Chapter 15. The Departure. The sun hung low over Ravenwood Hall, its golden rays piercing the morning mist and bathing the rose garden in a warm, forgiving light. The estate, though scarred by the recent tragedy, stood with a quiet dignity, its towers and blooms a testament to resilience. Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings stood on the gravel drive, their bags packed, the car now fully repaired and waiting to carry them away. The small parlor, with its ticking grandfather clock and faded tapestries, was behind them, its role as the stage for truth now complete. Hastings adjusted his hat, his face a mix of relief and melancholy, while Poirot, immaculate in his tailored coat, surveyed the scene with a serene finality. The air was crisp, carrying the faint sweetness of roses and the promise of a new day. Poirot's green eyes lingered on the garden, where the memory of Lady Margaret Ashbourne's murder had been laid to rest with the arrest of Edward Grayson and Sir Reginald Ashbourne. The case was closed, the truth unveiled. Yet Poirot's mind, ever active, seemed to weave one final reflection on the tapestry of human nature that had defined this affair. "Mon cher Hastings," Poirot said, his voice soft but resonant, "we leave Ravenwood Hall, but its lessons, they travel with us. The murder of Lady Margaret, it was a crime of passion and betrayal, but also a mirror to the soul. The little gray cells, they have done their work, and now we return to the world where other mysteries await." Hastings turned to Poirot, his expression thoughtful. "It's strange, Poirot. We've solved the case, brought justice, but I can't shake the feeling of sadness for Clara, Roger,
About myself." Poirot bowed slightly, his eyes warm. "Madame, the truth, it is a stern teacher, but a kind one. You have faced it with dignity. Go forward, and let the past be a lesson, not a chain." Mrs. Langley nodded, a faint smile breaking through her reserve, and turned back to the house. Hastings watched her go, then turned to Poirot. "You've changed lives here, Poirot. Not just by catching the killers, but by giving people like Clara, Roger, and Mrs. Langley a chance to move on." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "The little grey cells, Hastings. They seek not only justice, but clarity. To solve a crime is to restore order, but to understand the heart, that is to plant the seeds of hope. This case, it was a puzzle of greed, pride, and love, but in its resolution, we have seen the strength of those who remain." As they reached the car, the driver opened the door, and Poirot paused, casting one final glance at Ravenwood Hall. "The roses," he murmured. "They bloom despite the thorns, just as humanity endures despite its flaws. This, mon cher, is why I, Hercule Poirot, pursue the truth, to remind the world that even in darkness, there is beauty." Hastings climbed into the car, his heart lighter. "You're a poet, Poirot, as much as a detective. What's next? Another mystery, another tangle of lies?" Poirot settled into his seat, his smile enigmatic. "The world, it is never short of mysteries, Hastings. But for now, let us find a tisane worthy of Hercule Poirot, and perhaps a moment of peace before the next challenge calls." The car rolled down the drive, the grand silhouette of Ravenwood Hall fading into the mist. The roses stood silent, their petals catching the last light, a quiet farewell to the truth that had set them free. As the estate vanished from view, Poirot closed his eyes, his mind already turning to the next